Well, let's roll. Let's get going. We'll probably have a few more people jumping in with us. Yeah, so we're really pumped. What we want to do is just kind of give you a quick little snapshot of what we're going to be doing today. And really, this conversation that we're going to be having today is we're entitling it "Vision for Your Ministry: Keys for Christ-Centered Vision that Empowers Your People." And really, what we want to do a deep dive into today is really vision. How do you look at vision? How do you integrate vision? How do you assess vision within your different ministries? Because it's such an important part of what ministry looks like for us. So if you begin to think about like what would your life look like if, right? So you begin to think about, imagine, what if your ministry had clarity and passion? And how would it be different if leaders, volunteers, attenders, college students, young adults of your ministry were 100% bought in to the vision of making disciples for Jesus, right? And so that's what we want to see. That's really what we want to lean into today as we begin to look about this idea of vision. But here's the deal: is Jen, you're not my wife, you're Ben.
That's
Ben and
true.
I have the opportunity every single month, every single week to talk to leaders all over the country. And what we see often within the context of ministry is we begin to diagnose what's going on in their ministries. As we begin to ask questions, we begin to see some commonality. We begin to see things within ministry. And number one is we see a lot of solo leadership. And what we mean by that is functionally the lead person, and that's a lot of you on this call right now, the lead person, the senior leader, if you were to disappear, right? Let's say something were to happen, God were to call you some other place. Let's say something tragically happened to you. What would happen to your ministry? And what we see is most ministries aren't set up in a way where they have other leaders around them that are actually helping them execute what the ministry looks like. So we see a lot of solo ministry. Number two, concerned about attendance, where we use that as our primary metric for whether we're being successful or not. The third one is that there is little clarity in terms of what's next. In terms of, okay, what does it look like a week from now, a month from now, a year from now? We see a lot of spinning of wheels where there's a lot of things happening, but the ministry isn't accomplishing very much. And so as we begin to think about this, here's the big question: is why today? Like, why? The big question is, why are we having this conversation around vision for your ministry? And here's what we want to talk about is that it's essential for you as for your ministry to move into this idea of understanding how important it is. The average ministry lacks a clear, compelling vision. And as we talk to leaders and as we listen to ministries and understand what's happening, a lot of times what we see is that ministry is lacking a clear, compelling vision. Okay? But here's the good news. The good news is Jesus did not call you to lead for average, right? We have the opportunity to be a part of the greatest mission on the earth. And that is the expansion of the kingdom of God and to participate into some of the things that he is doing. So we want to help you leverage today your ministry, your gifts, your vision for what God is calling you to into the future. Okay, so that's what we're going to set the table for today. But before we do that, hey, let me introduce ourselves real quick. So my name's Andy Abramson. I am the founder and national director of Elementum. In fact, 10 years ago on June 1st, we launched this organization to help ministries just like you accomplish the mission. And you're going to also hear from Ben Pontius, who is my right-hand guy. He's the regional director of the Midwest. So he's in charge of all of our ministry leaders that are in Minnesota, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, as well as other kind of content and development. So we're going to be navigating the conversation today. Right now, we are currently working with 29 different churches and campus leaders, and our network expands to over 125 different partnerships that we're working alongside. And so a couple things about what we do. Equipping, it's really about this opportunity for assessments, trainings, tools, resources, even like things that we're doing today, right? Just ways that we can lean into and equip the church and you guys as leaders. Secondly, we love helping connect leaders. We believe that you're not intended or designed to do this by yourself. And so how do we create spaces and collaborations for you to work together? And then the last one is the mobilization as we begin to move forward of coaching, strategic planning, consulting, as well as our process. We're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So I'd encourage you to begin to think about some of those questions, some of the things that you may want to be asking specific about your ministry, and Ben and I will take a few minutes to talk about that here today. Ben, anything you want to add before we jump into this conversation?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I think that third piece, the mobilization piece, is so crucial. We've had a couple conversations within our staff about over the last couple of weeks about how we tend so easy, the tendency when there's so much information out there, this webinar being a good example of that. It's easy to access information, great content, stuff that is high quality, but if you're not implementing it and mobilizing and moving into putting into action what you're learning, it's not going to be particularly life transforming for you, right? That's Jesus is all about discipleship. Discipleship is all about putting into action what you're learning. So we love helping people with that, the coaching, strategic planning, the mobilization piece. So if what you're listening to here, like Andy said, if you got questions later, we'll touch on that, but also be some opportunities for you to connect with us and help us move you to think about how can you actually start implementing what you're learning here, which is key.
Yeah, lots of information, very little implementation. Cool. So let's dive in. So what is vision, right? Now here's the interesting thing is as you begin to think about this question of what is vision, sometimes words can be confusing because of language that is out there, right? So I think one of the challenges we see, it's very confusing when we even say vision, right? Because there's a lot of different contexts that can come into place, or different things that can come into the context. And so what we want to do is begin to share about what is vision, right? So there's two parts we want to think about or kind of lay the foundation for vision. Number one is, first we need to understand that we are a part of God's grand vision, right? So, and this is so important for us to say at the very beginning, because what we need to understand is that we're a part of something bigger. And so the vision that we're talking about, or the vision that we're encouraging you to have within your ministry, isn't just about you like trying to conjure up something, but it's really about this idea of that God is in the midst of doing something. How can you begin to understand what it looks like for you to contribute into that vision? And so we want to start to think about this idea that we are a part of a bigger story. And this started all the way back in Genesis chapter 2, like the whole creation story, where we were created in the image of God, that we were given even roles in ways to participate in, as we were to work the ground, and we were to inhabit the earth and to begin to move forward. So we need to understand, even in the beginning, God even began to create a picture of what the future would look like. Right. So you begin to give a picture of what this would begin to look like. And as what we need to understand is, even every action that we take is directed and driven by vision, right? Every single day, there's an underlying kind of motivation behind why you do what you do that is ultimately kind of brought out through vision. And one of the things you need to understand is, like, what are those things? What are those things that begin to move forward, even in small, simple things, right? Whether it's like going to college or beginning to diet, like there is a picture that you have for your future that is really a vision that drives those actions. And so we need to understand, firstly, that we are a part of God's grand vision. Secondly, we need to talk about that vision is not mission. Okay. I think one of the challenges that we see out there is that they're like sometimes and you've seen this before, Ben, with working with different
Yep.
churches and leaders that sometimes words are mixed up. Vision, mission versus purpose versus all these kind of different things. What we want you to kind of understand is when we're talking about vision today, the mission is really the why. I want you to think about the mission as being like the compass, right? It's the thing that guides you to ask the question, are we moving in the right direction? So that's mission. When we talk about vision, we're talking about the where. We're talking about the picture that we see as we begin to move forward into the future. And so as we're talking about vision, for your college ministry, for your young adult ministry, for your leaders, what you're doing for them is giving them a picture of what the future could look like as you begin to move forward and to begin to participate in the kingdom of God.
Yeah, that's huge. So the next question then coming out there, right? So that's so essential. The vision is not mission. That's the biggest confusion I see people make, is they think about vision and mission as equivalent. They're not. Yeah, like Andy was saying. So the next question that we need to answer is, okay, why? Why does vision matter? And I think there's at least three essential things that we need to think about vision. First thing, vision engages the heart and inspires hope. It's going to empower people to move, right? If you have, Andy mentioned the example of dieting, if you want to lose weight, if you want to be healthier, you have this mental picture in your mind that engages your heart of, here's what I'm going to look like this summer. I want to have that beach body, or I want to be able to live and stay healthy into old age. And that picture, whether or not you've consciously taken the time to actually visualize and picture it, that's what's happening in your mind. You have this picture, you have a narrative of, here's what the future is going to look like if I do this. And that engages your heart and empowers you to act forward into that. Second one is vision clarifies the next steps. And this one is so important. Vision clarifies, what do I do? Where should I go? What's next? There's always 1,000 things calling for our attention at any given moment. And if you have a lack of clarity about what is next and what the vision is that God's called you into, you're going to tend to run and jump and hop on whatever is most urgent rather than what is actually the most important next step. Last one that I think is so essential here is vision mobilizes the masses, right? You might be able to bring one or two people along with you to a destination unknown. If you have two or three people who are really close friends, you might say, hey guys, let's go that direction. We don't know exactly where we're going. And if they really love you, care for you, they may follow you, but you're not going to mobilize the masses without vision. Clear vision helps people push outside their comfort zone because they see the value in where you're going and say it's worth the discomfort, the cost that it's going to take us to get there, right? Jesus talks about this. He said even Jesus was motivated by a vision, right? Hebrews says he for the joy set before him endured the cross. He had this vision, this picture and narrative of, here's what's coming for me on the other side of this, on the other side of this pain. Because I see that, I will go through the pain and pay that price to get to the beauty of the vision on the other side, right? Which leads us into the question, okay, is this biblical, right? The idea of vision, by and large, at least the language now that's kind of coming to the church, is largely drawn from the business world. But I would argue, you, like Andy was saying earlier, right? You cannot have vision in a whole sense without it being drawn from biblical grounding, especially if we're going to lead ministries well. And I think this is so crucial, right? God ultimately is the foundational, the primal, the original visionary. He envisions creation and creates it. Not only that, but he envisions the pathway to redemption. Ephesians 1, Paul talks about the vision that God has, that God's goal is moving towards everything being united in Christ Jesus, which is such a beautiful picture of the restoration of all things. So God has this narrative vision that he's working out through creation and throughout history. Second one, right, you can't escape the idea of vision when you read through the Old Testament prophets. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, all of them have hundreds of visions, in the sense of literally where God gave them visions, and then also in the sense of where they're narrating telling people, hey, here is what the new creation is going to look like. The lamb and the lion are going to lay down together. People are going to beat their swords and turn them into plowshares, because everything. So each one of those is vision language that's engaging people's heart and saying, hey, let's move together towards this future. Two more examples of biblical vision before move on to the next little section. So Nehemiah, right, is, I think, the most readily grabbed story of this, of leadership, of vision in the Old Testament. He hears about the state of Jerusalem. His heart is moved by what he hears about that. Then he takes the time to think about, okay, what are the next steps that I need to take? And then he mobilizes the masses. He goes back to Jerusalem, casts a vision for them of, here's what it will be like once we've restored these walls. And that mobilizes people into taking the risk of starting to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Lastly, Great Commission, right? Jesus is the premier example of this, following these other examples. And he cast the vision for his disciples of a group of people, saying, go out, and I'm giving you this mission. I'm appointing you, go out and make disciples, and they're going to teach them to do, and he gives them the clear steps, right? Teach them to do everything I've commanded you, baptize them, so on and so forth. So vision is all over the Bible. The language maybe is slightly different than what is used nowadays, because we're drawing it from the business world, but I think it is so foundational and crucial for us. We can't escape it. If we're trying to escape it, we're probably doing something wrong. Andy, you want to add anything onto that?
No, I was thinking about those three things, that you initially started with like motivating the heart, next steps, and then mobilizing the masses, right? And in a lot of ways, what I see is a lot of kind of tension, because those things aren't there, right? And I think it's a picture that shows how much vision is lacking in our ministries, because what I hear is like, my people are unmotivated. We're just kind of going through the motions, and like I can't get people bought into what I'm doing. And so I think about those three things, even those examples that you're given of Nehemiah, the Great Commission, of some of the Old Testament prophets, about how the importance of the heart, the next steps, and the mobilization are for our ministries, and how we see that threaded through different stories in the Bible of how that vision is put in front of us.
That's huge. I think you're making a great point there, because if we default to assume that if people aren't motivated, if people aren't passionate, if people aren't following through on stuff, it's because they're too busy, or they're lazy, or they just don't have the right motivation. But really, probably what's happening, there's obviously multiple factors involved in why we do what we do, but it's very likely that if people in your ministry, your leadership team, aren't following through, aren't passionate about what you're doing, it's probably because they haven't seen the vision in a way that engages their heart. It's not that they're slackers, or that they're just young adults who don't follow through. There may be some of that there, but probably if they caught the vision and saw the picture of what you saw that's moving you forward, they would join you in moving forward with as much, if not more, passion and energy.
Yeah. And even to realize that there are visions that are vying for our attention all the time, right?
Yeah.
Even that's what marketing is. Marketing is, in some sense, like trying to like put their vision of a preferred future into your heart, so that you're captured by that and begin to kind of embrace that. And so even like marketing, or all these kind of, like, vision is one of those things that we're being bombarded with. It's the question of can we, like, even those biblical characters, of can we begin to like identify the right ones to jump into versus being pulled in so many different directions.
Last thing I want to say on that, and then we can dive into this connecting vision to reality. I think people tend to escape if they don't have a clear vision for their life, if they don't have clear next steps, or a vision that's going to enable them to face the pain of taking those next steps. We usually run to escapism, which you can think of so many young adults. I see this particularly with young guys, where they go to video games, or they go to Netflix, or they go to social media. Nowadays it's so easy to access that stuff. And if your people are defaulting to going to that stuff and escaping, it's probably because they're trying to run away from the pain, because they have not had someone who's helped walk them
Yeah.
from, either they are lacking a clear vision of the future of who they are called to be by God, or they don't know how to walk the path towards that future, and that kind of ties into this connecting the vision to reality.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, let's jump into practical a little bit. And this is where I think for a lot of you, this is where the rubber's going to meet the road, right? As you begin to look about some of the practical sides of vision. So what we want to do now is kind of shift into, okay, what is this? How do we begin to think about this in terms of our ministries? Okay, yes, we understand this broad view vision. Yes, we understand that there's a biblical kind of argument for vision. Okay, so what does that mean for us right now? I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see out there is the inability for us to connect vision to reality. Okay. And here's where I would kind of the way that I describe it with people, and you've seen this, Ben, lots of times, is I think that a lot of times people are kind of lean towards one side or the other. They're either like kind of future dreaming oriented, like they're always thinking about the future, or they're very practical in the now. But I think when you have a solid vision, right, what it does is it not only helps guide and direct a preferred future picture, but also activates in terms of what you should be doing right now. So what I want to do is I want to talk to you about the kind of two different parts of the vision: the long term and then the short-term execution. Okay. So think about the long term. The long-term vision is essential to the robustness of your vision. I want you to think about, like, and we use this tool, Ben and I use this tool with different leaders called the Horizon Storyline, where it helps you develop both the long-term side of vision as well as the short-term execution. I want you to think about the long term as being a mountain that is way off into the distance. And this is the way that I describe it to people. You can't see the details of that mountain, right? So I used to live in the Pacific Northwest, right? And so I would drive from Washington to Oregon. And as I'm driving from Washington to Oregon, on the left side is Mount Hood, right? And I could see some clear days, you would see just like this unbelievable, majestic mountain as you're driving across the river in the Northwest. And it was interesting. I couldn't see the details of that mountain, but I kind of understood the broad outline and some of the kind of big picture
Yeah.
things of what that mountain looked like. Now, if I were to drive 45 minutes or an hour closer to Mount Hood, now all of a sudden the details are coming more clear for me. Right now I'm beginning to see the roads and the trees and the rivers and all. Well, long-term vision is the same thing. I think sometimes people get pushback on long-term vision because they can't see the details of it, right? They don't know. They say, well, I just can't, like, but the important thing as you think about long-term vision is not the details. It's kind of the big outline. Where is this future where God is calling you to be a part of? I want you to think about long-term vision is supposed to be more like inspirational, right? It kind of is that idea to move into the future. But here's the thing: just because you have a long-term vision doesn't mean that it's connected to short-term reality. And that's why, even with long-term vision, you need to have that short-term execution. 30 days, 90 days. What are you doing this week? What are some of the practical plans and goals and strategies that are tied and connected to that long-term vision? Okay. So I want to share a quick story with you.
Hey, what,
Go for
before
it.
you share that story, I would love for people who are watching this, comment in the chat, which one do you default to,
Yeah,
the
that'd be good.
long-term vision or the
Long-term or
short-term
short-term?
execution? For me, definitely long-term. It's
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah. Yeah. So this will highlight the story as you're sharing in the chat. Is I'm a futurist, right? So when I take Strengths Finders, futurist is number one on the Strengths Finders assessment for me. And so I remember early days of Elementum, I would go into our team kind of meetings and I would share about future. right? I would share about, oh, this is, what we're doing. This is where I believe God has taken us. And we would get so excited about what the future would hold. Then people would leave that meeting, and then they would go back to their desks and ask the question, okay, like, what does that have to do? What do I do right now? Like, what does that mean that I need to begin to do? Because what I wasn't helping them do was pair the long-term vision with the short-term execution, which we need to do as well. And the way that I describe it to people is the short-term execution is what you're in day to day, but you have to periodically look up and gaze into the distance and ask the question, are we still heading in the right direction, or do we need to kind of reorient? And so I think it's so important to tie those things in terms of long-term vision as well as short-term execution. Okay, a couple vision errors. I want to jump into this. So what are some pitfalls that we see, right? What are some things that we see when it comes to vision that is hard, that can sometimes get people to stumble? Okay, number one, sometimes I see a vision that is too big. Okay, and here's what I mean by too big, because you could be asking the question, well, isn't that what you're saying? Like, too big? Like, you want to have that? No, here's what when your vision is too big. If it fails to create the movement because you can't see what the next steps are, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's say I have a vision. I came to you guys on the webinar, and I said, okay, my goal next fall is to reach the entire of University of Texas, Austin in the first semester, right? Great vision.
Nice.
Yeah, that amazing vision. But in some ways that vision is too big because I don't really know where to get going with it. Okay, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's good and that's motivational for me. But what's the first step? And then what's the second step? What's the third step? Like, how do I begin to get going? So if your vision is too big, where you can't tie any short-term execution into that vision, your wheels are spinning. Okay. The other one is too small. So if a vision is too small, what happens is it doesn't motivate you to move forward. You actually get bored with it. So let's say Ben's vision for this week is to wake up by noon each day. That's not very
Never going to
motivational.
happen.
It's not very motivational for Ben, right? It's kind of like, oh yeah, or my vision is that I'm going to, answer 5 emails this week. Well, that's easy to do, right? So if our vision is too small, it can bore. So on one side, it can be too big, where it doesn't, like, you don't know what the next steps are. The other side is it can be too small, where it doesn't motivate you and inspire you to begin to move forward. I think also then it can be too general, right? So too general, where it doesn't have any ways to measure the progress. Or it can be too specific, where you get trapped into the details of attempting to guess what will happen down the road. Here's what I mean by that is, let's say you're going to begin to find the details of what's going to happen 5 years from now. You don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now. Like, you don't know whether, we don't even know what's going to happen like next week in the time that we're living in right now. And so if we get too specific and try to deal, it can discourage us because we're not meeting and accomplishing some of those details that we put way off. So it can be too big, too small, too general, too specific. Anything you want to add to that, Ben?
I don't think so. It's good stuff.
Cool.
And I think that, right, you, probably just like we talked about, some people tend to go towards the long term. Some people tend to go to the short term. You probably tend to pull towards one or two of these four as well. You probably either think too big and don't think enough, or you're defaulting to too small because it's safer and it's easier, but then it doesn't drive you. And I think that's finding that sweet spot is really crucial.
Yeah. So that sweet spot is what you're looking for, right? Of not too, too big, not too small, not too general, not too specific. And if you think about even some of the examples that Ben gave of biblical um, some of the biblical examples that we see, they did a tremendous job of painting a picture of the future, but also tying it to specific actions. So think about Nehemiah, right? So Nehemiah is part of the motivation was the temple being rebuilt, the walls being rebuilt. Like, I see this day coming, but it wasn't just talking about the future with the people. He's saying, okay, now you're going to build this section of the wall, and you're going to build this section of the wall, and you're going to do this. So he was tying a future picture into short-term action, which was really that sweet spot. Or you think about Jesus, right? Where Jesus says, I want you, go and make disciples of all nations. This is how it's going to, but here's how that's going to happen, right? You're going to baptize, you're going to preach, you're going to teach. Like, he's giving both the long-term, like, here's the vision, but also here is that short-term, what you can do right now to get that going. And so I think where we really need to find ourselves as leaders is, how do we find that sweet spot, right? How do we get into that spot of long-term, yes, but also short-term execution to begin to inspire people, but also give them that short-term action as they begin to move forward.
And really important too. I mean, you think about the Great Commission is a great example of that is about as big of a vision as you can get, right? You're going to fill the world and go out, and make disciples of all the nations. That's huge. But you got to think about what's the, I don't know, for lack of a better term, what's like the equity that Jesus is operating on. His disciples understand his power. They've gotten a taste of the miraculous that he can do. So the bank account per se of vision that he's drawing from, that he's saying, is the history that he's had with them and the faith that they're growing into in him. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about where's the sweet spot for vision. There's lots of different factors you can evaluate, and that is like, how much trust do I have with my people? How long has our ministry been around? What have we seen God do that's amazing? And what is our vision that we have? Is it clearly tied in to God's vision for this world? Is it connected to the Great Commission piece? Because, right, Jesus says, I am with you always till the end of the age. So that's a key piece. So yeah, I want to give you something practical here. Vision checkup. How do you know whether your vision is working or not? Whether or not you're in that sweet spot. And before I jump into that, I just want to remind you guys, we'll do some Q&A with our last 5-10 minutes or so. So feel free to be posting those questions as we're running through this in the comments, and then we'll respond to those when we get to Q&A time. So how do you know whether your vision is working? 4 questions, 4 kind of things to think about. First one is language. The number one indicator of alignment and whether or not people are bought into a vision is whether or not you're speaking the same language. Ron and myself and a couple other Elementum partners, and I got a couple people locally, we're doing a 90-day Bible read through. So not too long ago, was reading the story of Babel, and think about how difficult it got for it became impossible for the people in that story. After God confuses their language, they can no longer work together in order to build this tower up to heaven. Now, in no way, obviously, am I suggesting we're trying to build the tower to heaven. But if you don't have the same language for your vision or your mission or your values or really any part of what you're doing, it's going to cause misalignment and tension and slow you down. And most likely, right, probably your ministry team, you all speak the same literal language, but even the nuances of the way that you use specific words can have an impact. So one kind of sticking point for our ministry that we have here in Fargo, we're focused on multiplying communities of 10 to 25, maybe 30 people. And that's kind of our primary vehicle for disciple making. And we use the word multiply when we talk about adding additional communities. We don't say multiplicate, division. We don't say adding. We don't say we're going to split off. And we've had a couple leaders over the years who were saying, no, I want to, we're not multiplying. We're dividing our communities, or we're branching off, or we're splitting communities. And we've been really adamant saying, no, the language that you use for this is multiplication, because it's communicating a specific thing, right? The idea, if I say we're multiplying communities, the way that feels is totally different than this community is being divided, or we're splitting up this community. So language is number one. The question you ask is, do you and your people use the same words when you're talking about the ideal future? Second one is intention, right? Vision without execution is pointless. You can dream all you want. You can have a great vision out there, but like we've been talking about, if you don't have that short-term execution that is moving you in that direction, it's going to be pointless. You don't start building a house from the idea you have in your head. No contractor is going to start building a skyscraper without a blueprint. But a lot of the times we go into this vision idea, we get this great picture in our head. We don't take the time to craft the language. We don't make a specific intentional plan and write it out for people to do. So if there's not a clear plan for how you're working on your vision, you need one. Third one is action. Right? You got the plan, you got the words to it, you got the plan in place, but are your actions actually aligned with that plan? It's amazing how often we get off track and lose sight, where we get caught in the weeds of stuff, emergencies come up, even very legitimate emergencies like, oh, this person in my ministry is threatening to commit suicide, I need to go do some counseling stuff there, or 2 of my leaders got jobs out of town, they're moving. So now we got to figure out how we're going to juggle these 2 programs that they were leading. Those are legitimate fires that need to be put out. But in the midst of that, we need to make sure that our actions are consistently moving us toward the vision that God has given us. Fourth one is participation. Is, has the ownership of the vision moved beyond you? Next step after that is, has it moved beyond your team of official leaders? You're lacking vision if you're the only one who has it. Because a vision that's not shared is really pointless. And when it comes to ministry leadership, right? In each of the biblical examples we looked at earlier, the vision is being shared with other people. God, of course, shares the vision of creation by creating humanity in his image and communicating and saying, hey, I am entrusting you with the opportunity to grow my image in this world, spread and fill the world. Nehemiah, he doesn't go and start trying to build a wall by himself. He casts that vision and shares it with other people. The biblical prophets in the Old Testament, that's literally all they're doing, is they're sharing the vision that God has given them. Jesus, similar story. Biblically, if you have vision and you don't share it, you don't have vision. And that's, so we need to be asking the question is, has ownership of the vision moved beyond you? Your vision health can be measured by how viral it is. Is it spreading within your leadership team? Is it spreading within your ministry? So those are the kind of 4 diagnostic questions. Screenshot that slide, type down those questions, talk about them with your team. They'll be really helpful for you. So then of course the question is, okay, if we're saying negative on a couple of those questions, how do we improve? Honestly, this is not hard, but it takes intentionality. It takes time. And at least I should say, for me, it's not hard. For some people, this is going to take a little bit more work, more focus, but it's not something that's going to take a lot of sweat. It's not something that is impossible for you. It's within reach. You could do this in a couple of days, most likely, if you set out a small chunk of time. So first step, if you want to clarify that vision that it has gotten distorted or is lacking, first step is to step back and listen. Make some space in your schedule first to listen to God, right? He is the ultimate and original visionary. Second, listen to your people and to your context. So your people, meaning the people within your ministry, what's their passion? What's their hope? What's their dream? And then the people in your context, meaning the people you've been called to reach, the city, the college campus, whatever. So step back and listen. Second step is to start a conversation, invite other people into contributing to that vision. Like we said, if it's not spreading out beyond you, it's not really effective biblical vision that's going to empower people to make disciples. And one of the key ways to spread it out is to let other people give input on it. Third, make space to plan. If you don't have space to plan for yourself individually and with your team, you're going to get off track. For our team, we do this at a couple different levels. We do it on a personal level, weekly at least. On a monthly and quarterly level as a team, we're regularly taking stock, looking at where the vision that we feel like God's called us to, asking questions, knowing down what are the projects that we're doing, are we moving forward, which gets to that 4th point, we write it out. There was a study that was done and I didn't write down in my notes, I don't think, where this was. Oh no, I did. University in California. This is back in, I believe, the 80s. There was a study done by Dr. Gail Matthews. They found out that people who write out their plans, their goals, are 42% more likely to follow through on those goals. So if you are not writing out that vision and that plan on paper, ideally with pen and paper, and you can type it up afterwards, whatever. I think there's something powerful between pen and paper. It's not going to happen, and it's significantly more likely to take place and follow through on something that's actually written out. So step back and listen, start a conversation, make space to plan, and write it out. If you do those 4, and I got one more for you, bonus one, 5, keep it in front of you, right? If you've written it out and then you put it in a folder in the back of your office, or if you talk about it once with your team and you go through all that planning and then don't keep it in front of you, you're not going to make it towards that vision. So keep it in front of you, take regular time to look up and make sure that you're headed towards that ideal future that you feel like God has called you to. You do those 5 things and you'll be able to get incredible clarity on vision that's going to shift your ministry significantly.
Yeah. And I was thinking, Ben, what an incredible time to be doing this, and that's what I've been encouraging a lot of leaders is, one of the things that I've noticed as we talk to a lot of leaders every single month is a lot of them just can't get off the ministry treadmill. Like they're so busy, they have no time. And the question I always ask people is, I'm like, okay, yes, you're working in your ministry, but are you working on your ministry? Like, do you have time to actually step back and ask some of those questions or do some of those things that Ben just talked about, to begin to listen, to begin to communicate with your team, to think about how to keep it in front of you? Well, this time right now, for a lot of you, absolutely, is the perfect time to start developing vision. Right? You may not even know exactly what the future looks like, but you can kind of get that big outline of where God is taking you and to begin to create some motivation and action towards that. And so my encouragement for you is, if you're listening, like whether you're on the call live with us or you're listening down the road on the replay, like now is the perfect time for you to begin to create some space to do this for your ministry.
One thing to add on to that, talking about, right, the current moment, if you're watching this now, end of May, right? Yeah, end of May 2020, we're in the midst of COVID-19. There's all sorts of disruption. Who knows what the fall is going to look like if you're doing campus ministry? Will the students be there? We don't know. Will they be all online? We don't know. If you're a local, church-based ministry, a lot of those same questions coming up. But here, we were talking about this in a group coaching call, was the last week, I think. You can be clear on what you're not clear on. But you can, and so those are 2 things. Be clear about what your vision is. Say, hey guys, we want to do this, but we also are clear that we don't know these 5 things. The mountain is too far away to know exactly how steep the pathway that we have to walk up to get to the top is going to be. We don't know, whether it's going to be winter when we get there or whether it's going to be summer when we get there. So we'll pack accordingly and bring the supplies for both options. I think it's so crucial. One other thing I'll say on that, I think particularly if you're working with college students and young adults, I mentioned this several times, but the Fargo downtown, there used to be in a side of an alleyway downtown, someone had spray painted on the wall, "I follow dreams, not rules." And it was just, someone, it wasn't anything fancy. They just took black spray paint and sprayed that. And every time I drove by that, my thought has been, that is exactly what is going on with so many young adults. I think probably across most generations, but there's something about that, young adult college age stage where that resonates with people. I'm going to follow a vision. I'll follow the dream. I'm not going to be so locked into rules. Now we can debate whether or not that is correct or right or, biblically sound. But the reality is, vision is going to engage the hearts of your young adults. If you can give them a taste of the power and the passion of the future that God is calling them to as individuals and as disciples of Jesus, they will step into that in radical ways.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, a couple more things here. Like Ben said before, if you have any questions, you can start throw those in the chat. And if there's anything at the end, we'll loop back around and have some conversation around. So go ahead and type that in. So here's the last couple things. The first one is vision matters. And we hope that you've seen that to this point of saying clear, gospel-centered vision. It's going to empower, it's going to inspire, it's going to motivate, it's going to help your people move forward. Right. And so you need to understand the power of vision in your ministry. And it can't be one of those things of like, yeah, I'll get to it at some point. It needs to become one of those conversations that you and your leadership team begin to rally around of saying, we need to discover where God is calling us to in the future. And so
Yeah.
vision matters. Like it will continue to help your ministry move forward. It will give you not just the ministry treadmill or the week to week, just kind of like copycat what you've done 1 week and 1 month and next year and so on, but it'll begin to help you move forward. It's going to continue to motivate your people, right? As you think about your leadership, your college students, your young adults, it will allow them to participate and to be a part of the process as you begin to move forward. You're going to begin to see people invited into that process more than ever. And so what I want you to understand is vision matters, and it's worth taking a day or two. It's worth taking a retreat with your leadership team. It's worth several conversations. It's worth you getting away. You don't know what fall is going to look like, but what if you were to get away for a day and just pray and see what the Lord would show you in terms of what he's calling you to in the future? So vision matters. Vision matters.
To personal point on that, like for me, the last 6 months or year, so I've felt a lack of, passion, energy around our local ministry. I love what we're doing. But it's coming up on 10 years of doing it, and 10 years is a long time to be doing anything. So I have really on my list of things to do in the next month and a half, 2 months, is to do exactly what Andy's talking about there, is take 24 hours, ideally 48 hours, get away by myself and renew my spirit and my mind and stuff around that. Okay, what is God called us to do as a team here in Fargo, North Dakota, as we're trying to reach people who haven't been reached by the gospel and who aren't connected with more traditional churches in this area. And so, man, for you as a leader, if you're feeling drained, if you're feeling a lack of energy, take a step back, look at the big picture.
Yeah, cool. Last thing, and then we'll jump into some questions here, is what are some next steps for you? Maybe you're in a place as you're listening today and you're like, man, I need some help with this, right? Like I would love to just have somebody listen to me and process with me. Man, we would love to have a conversation with you around vision, around what it looks like for you to begin to move forward, to talk about your ministry, to talk about the summer, to talk about the fall. And so if you're interested in something like that, we want to invite you to jump on a call with one of our team to get some outside input. You can go to elementumresources.com/call, and that will link you up to a calendar page where you can find a slot and you can jump on with one of our team there. And so we want to invite you to do that. People do it every single month with us. It's a huge opportunity and way that we can serve moving forward. And so if that's something that you need, elementumresources.com/call, and that will get you to a space where you can jump on the call with one of our team. Okay, let's do a little Q&A. Ben?
We got Dr. Ron Frost throwing the hard questions our way.
Oh, man. We should pull him on the call and have him come in and answer.
So his question is, I think this is a good question. He says a big question is gospel vision identical to Christ-centered vision as in Hebrews 12:1 and 2, right? Hebrews 12:1 and 2 is we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, look to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, and now he's seated at the right hand of God. So you want to respond to that at all, Andy?
Yeah. So just like thinking about this idea of gospel vision, I guess it's language, right? I guess you could have some people where gospel vision isn't identical to Christ-centered vision, but I would say that gospel vision is a subset of Christ-centered vision. So I think about like even a passage in like 2 Corinthians chapter 5, where Paul is being invited into being a minister of reconciliation because of what Christ did for him. And so the motivation behind why he was doing what he was doing, because he understood Christ's love for him and the sacrifice that Christ made. And he says, for Christ's love compels me And so therefore I'm a minister of reconciliation. And so I would say it's directly aligned. Now, is that always the case? I think with language is you can have some variations. But I think, yeah, I think Christ-centered vision, it has a subset of that is gospel vision.
Yeah. So we got a couple more minutes here before we wrap up. So let's maybe, what are one or two questions that frequently come up when we're talking about vision?
I think some of the I think some practical questions of like how long, like how often do you address vision?
Yeah,
I think it's one of those things. Is that every day? Is that every? And so I think it'd be good. Maybe Ben, why don't you share a little bit about how we do this, right? Even on an
sure.
organizational level, or as we're working alongside, uh, you know, uh, teams, what this
Mhm.
looks like in terms of the rhythm of vision. And if you have any other questions, go ahead and throw those in the chat, and we can jump on those as well.
Yeah, so for within Elementum, and then we trickle this down to a lot of the partners that we're working with. Um, the 90-day cycle is really key. So the long-term vision piece is something that we'd set aside time annually to step back for a larger chunk of time. For us, it's usually because our team's scattered around the country. We come together for 3 to 4 days to kind of basically do a bunch of stuff. But a key part of that is saying, let's revisit. Here's our 1 or 2 year, or 5 year, 10-year vision pieces. What do we need to revise there? How are we doing that, moving towards that? But then on a month by month and a 90-day cycle, we're revisiting each of those things and saying, so what we'll do is we'll take that 90-day or that 2 year, 5 year vision, and we'll ask the question, okay, what do we need to do in the next 90 days to move us towards that vision? And then we'll, identify a couple more practical things. And then we take from those practical things on a 90-day, break it down to a monthly and a weekly. And if you want to be real nerdy, to even like a daily level, we're saying, hey, these are the steps that we're going to take to move us towards that vision.
Yeah.
And here's another, I think, reality is sometimes you get the vision wrong. Sometimes you feel like God's calling us to this mountain when he's really calling you over here. And that's not a bad thing. That's a part of the fallibility of us as humanity. But if we can be clear about what our vision is, and we're moving towards that, people are going to give you grace. You say, hey, we thought we were called to go this way. Feels like now we're being called to go over here. And we're going to be equally clear about the fact that we're changing. We're going to be clear about what this new direction is.
Yeah. I think too, even one of the things that we have a couple partners on here, but we call it tracking and posting. And so whenever we're on a call with them, they have to let us know what their 90 days are. And even we use the simple colors, green, yellow, red. Green, everything's moving forward. Yellow, and you can even do that with your team of saying, okay, here's our 2 or 3 90-day goals. Every time that we get together once a month or every other week as a leadership team, let's track and post where we're at in those 90-day goals. Are we moving forward in them? And then reminding them also of how those things contribute to the future.
Yeah, I think thinking of communicating vision, once you've taken the time to do those steps we mentioned, to step back, take time to actually put words to your vision and start communicating that on a practical level, I really think every time your team meets, whether they're a team of volunteers or whether it's a staff, you need to be touching on that vision in some way, shape, or form. Whether that means you literally read aloud what you wrote down, or that means you say, hey guys, tell me a story. What's something that happened in the last 2 weeks that got you excited? And here's what, as a senior leader, you can be listening for. Are the stories that they're telling when they're telling those stories, do those stories align with, are they along the pathway towards the vision that you feel like that you've agreed as a team, God's called you towards? And if they're consistently not in line, that's a little trigger saying, hey, maybe we're not in agreement. Maybe we took the time to write down this vision, but we haven't all necessarily fully bought into it.
Okay, I'm reading Zach's question here. Why do you think that God's vision, example, Great Commission, struggles to motivate people on its own? Why does our own language, contextualization, localization, God's vision help catalyze people to pursue God's vision?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think talking about language, this is a whole deep well to dive into, but part of it is just solely that we use language differently than God does. We use language differently. There's a reason that we're reading our Bibles in English and not in Greek, unless you're way cooler than I am. But right, so because the way that language has shifted over the years, we need to consistently update, not say modify, but communicate something in a way that's going to engage people's hearts in order to move it forward. Now, here's why consistently reading scripture is so crucial, is because we shouldn't be taking and just completely modifying the biblical foundation of those visions. Our heart also needs to be aligned with God's language. We need to learn to speak and to hear and to think like God is, right? Consistently, if you're reading through scripture, you're going to run into stuff where you're saying, hold on, that doesn't make sense. Free will or God's sovereignty? That's the big debate when I was in middle school, high school, that was always going on within youth group. And we try to find answers that make that tension fit, and usually they're dissatisfactory to half the people in the group. So when something like that comes up, what we need to realize is that that's meaning there's some lacking in our language or our mental framework, and we need to shift our thinking around that. Similarly, towards the vision that God has said, great commission, or think Old Testament prophetic vision of what the kingdom is going to look like, or Jesus parables. Those are inviting us to think about how do we need to change our language, our thinking framework to align with God's vision. So a little bit of both and I think are needed there.
Yeah, I think part of the motivation too is just to acknowledge our sinfulness too. I mean, like, even the perfect scenario with the vision that God gave Adam and Eve in the garden still wasn't enough to keep them like pointing straight, right? It was that
Yeah.
selfishness, that self-love, that curving in of ourselves that takes us out of vision. So we need to just acknowledge that for ourselves as leaders, or even the leaders that we're leading, or the people that we're leading, is we're fighting against sin nature. We're fighting against the devil. Like there's this, like, ultimately what Satan wants to do is you to take your eyes off of Christ's love, his call and vision for your life, and to put it on yourself, right? And for that vision to become self-serving. And so I think, even Zach, in your question here, of even that motivation that we need to realize is the hang up in ourselves as well as the people we're leading, ultimately is still that self-love, that sin that entangles people.
Which is why it's so crucial that vision be a team thing and not just you as an individual leader, because you're going to distort it. Whereas if you have a team of people, each one of them is going to see slightly differently, and you're going to help keep each other in line.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I think that's it for today. We've been 1 hour exactly. So just as a reminder, elementumresources.com/call. Let's get on a phone call and talk a little bit about your ministry and what some next steps are. Yeah, thanks for joining us today. We'll let you know about the next one coming down the pipe. It's always fun to be a part of these conversations with you and be on the front lines as you look at loving college students and young adults. So appreciate you all. Keep after it. We love you all.
Yeah.
Take it easy.
Blessings.
See ya.